Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for the invitation and for the opportunity to be able to speak with you all at this activity, virtual having become the norm, right? All right. So just to indicate, as PG would have alluded to, as well as Sati in opening remarks, that there really are several issues facing working women today, and these include the fact that a lot of women, significant number of women, are engaged in the informal sector. That means they don't have access to social protection, those kinds of things. Additionally, many women are engaged in unpaid care and domestic work. I think we will all agree that if we reflect on our own lives, it is the women in our lives that are doing the majority of those tasks, care tasks, looking after children, looking after elder relatives, and also the domestic work, the all of the household chores, right? So if we think about it, we would see that it is the women in our lives that really continue to bear the brunt of those responsibilities. Additionally, we see that working women, the majority of women tend to work in the lower paid jobs. So therefore, the average wages of women tend to be lower than the average wages of our male counterparts. Typically, also, we can observe that many women also work in lower skilled jobs. Not saying that we don't have women, highly skilled women, and we have some in this forum here this evening. But if you think about who are the cashiers in supermarkets, who are the staff in hotels and restaurants and those kinds of things, we can see that today we still see women dominated in lower skilled jobs across many sectors. And of course, as has happened with many elements, the pandemic has exacerbated some of these negative trends. So we're seeing, as PG and Sati identified already, we're seeing that more and more women had to engage in unpaid care work. So women were sitting with their children while they were doing online classes, trying to juggle working from home. Additionally, another issue particularly affecting women, which increased in the context of the pandemic, unfortunately, was a rise in gender-based violence. So we found that because of the restrictions implemented to combat the pandemic, we found that many women who were abused found themselves trapped at home with the abuser. So we recognize that there's been a spike in domestic violence in the context of the pandemic. So, in light of all of these issues and challenges and difficulties, what we require are relevant policies to address these issues. And when relevant policies are implemented to address these issues, we can then see that the standard of living that women have access to can be improved. Now, the national budget is an important policy tool through which measures to address the issues that are facing working women could be implemented. So, as you know, the budget is comprised of several measures, and many of these measures can be directed to improving the standard of living of women. This evening, I'm not going to necessarily focus specifically on the budget because I'm sure that all other panelists will fully and thoroughly ventilate the issues and concerns arising out of the national budget. I want to take this opportunity because we don't always have the opportunity to address an audience like this. So I want to take this opportunity to speak specifically to the international labor standards. And PG referenced two specific conventions in his remarks a short while ago, the Violence and Harassment Convention, as well as the Domestic Workers Convention. So the umbrella name for all of these things are called international labor standards. So in order not to be repetitive, so that all of us are speaking about the same budget measures, I want to take a little different angle and focus on the international labor standards because, like budget measures, international labor standards are critical in ensuring that working women can have access to an improved standard of living. So, as many of us may know, the International Labour Organization, which is the UN specialized agency which treats with employment and labor-related issues, they develop in partnership with all of their member states as well as constituents, i.e., workers and employers. They work together to develop these international labor standards. So, in 1919, when the ILO was first established. So that's just a little more than 100 years ago. So for a very, very long time, the ILO adopted its first conventions related to women. So these standards really seek to set a benchmark for the conditions of work with respect to various issues. So we mentioned previously violence and harassment and domestic workers. So an ILO convention on an issue such as these issues really set a benchmark to ensure that a specific group of workers are able to access decent work. So there are different types of international labor standards. Conventions like Convention 190 on violence and harassment and Convention 189 on domestic workers are just one type. So they're conventions, they're also protocols, and they're also recommendations. So to date, there are 190 conventions on a range of issues, 6 protocols, and 206 recommendations. So there's a significant body of work that seeks to set benchmarks when it comes to labor and employment. So what is the difference? Why don't we just only have conventions? What's the difference between conventions and protocols and recommendations? So conventions and protocols are legally binding. Member states need to ratify these instruments. And then we have recommendations, which are non-binding guidelines. So even if a country hasn't ratified a particular convention, there's still recommendations that provide guidance. So having established what these international labor standards are, let's just focus a little bit on standards that can really directly impact the standard of living of women. And these include Convention 100 on equal remuneration, Convention 111 on discrimination in employment and occupation, also Convention 156 on workers with family and responsibilities, also the Maternity Protection Convention number 183, as well as Convention number 149 on nursing personnel. And then the two that we've already mentioned so far, Convention number 189, as well as Convention number 190, 189 on domestic workers and 190 on violence and harassment. So some of these conventions that I've referred to were established in the 1950s, some in the 1980s, and then most recently, Domestic Workers Convention in 2012 and Violence and Harassment Convention in 2019. So it's not that this is a one-off effort, but really consistently over a long period of time, we've seen these conventions being produced to ensure the protection of workers' rights, and specifically to be able to facilitate the advancement of women and to contribute to increasing their standard of living. So the chair has given me a time reminder, which I will respect. So I will seek to just wrap up. But of course, I think in the question and answer, we can ventilate some of these issues more fully. So I did mention some specific standards, but just to say what's the position in Trinidad and Tobago to each of these. So Trinidad and Tobago has ratified Convention 100 on equal remuneration, as well as Convention 111 on discrimination. I trust that all of you are aware that there's a tripartite committee, so there are worker representatives on this committee that has a responsibility at the national level to consider each of these conventions and recommend ratification where necessary. So this committee, we refer to it as 144 committee. They have already considered Convention 189 and 190. The ministry is currently following up on the mechanisms required to ensure that the country is in compliance with each of the provisions of these instruments and consideration of 100, Convention 149 on nursing personnel has commenced. So I'll close, I'll end here for now. I just trust that I was able to successfully highlight some of the key international labor standards, which together with national budget measures can contribute in an important way to increasing the standard of living of working women.